son, and all of the people from Ron, Gwen Coulter. Gwen Coulter is here, and Walter's son, Gwen, is here. I'm just excited a little bit to see this guy. And so we have the great pleasure of having a beautiful program that Betsey Whitney has put together for us to enjoy. So please enjoy, and feel free afterwards to ask her any questions that you may have or anything you'd like to have her respond on. Thank you so much, Betsey Whitney.
And I would also like to thank Donna Jones for being so helpful to me. I didn't even know how to unplug the TV and the DVD player and bring it down here. I was very impressed with George and Pat and Thomas when they brought theirs. It was a hard act to follow. Thank you, Donna. And Pauline, who's looking at the Grange picture. Pauline, is that correct? Yeah. And Gail, yes. And Alice, and Ron, and Glenn, family members, and it is a small world. My mother, 96, lives in Marshfield, and my husband, Nate, and my daughter, Ashley, every weekend we go down to Marshfield to stay with my mother, who lives on the South River. And for years, I have driven down Furnace Street, stopped at the stop sign, always see a blue house sort of diagonally facing. Lo and behold, that's where Gail lives, and Pauline, for heaven's sake. It's a small world. So when Ron said, "Oh, my cousin Gail lives on Furnace Street," I went crazy on the other end of the phone. So hate to be running away from anybody. But today, being our Memorial Day celebration, is especially meaningful because we're honoring Chauncey Eisner and Ken Coulter. I knew Ken. I did not join the Grange, my family, until 2011. And one of the first events that I attended was a floral demonstration by Ken Coulter. We live in Pondville, which, and Ashley, I'm going to use the pointer. I'll do. Ashley's going to assist me every now and then. This is a map of Norfolk. I was a first grade teacher, so this is how it goes. Pondville is in the southeast section. Ken and Chauncey, and here's the Grange Hall up here. So Pondville is way out there. Most of you are familiar with Pondville Hospital. And when I moved to town, I thought Pondville was called Pondville because it was named after the Pondville Hospital. No, it was named after Daniel Pond and his descendants who settled the area in the late 1600s. Chauncey lived on Everett Street. And Ronnie grew up on Everett Street, one street away from me. I taught school in Sudbury. It seemed like very seldomly in town. I never met Chauncey personally. And throughout these past few months, I have gotten to know Ken Coulter much better. But I have met Ken. I have met Ken personally. But I grew to know Chauncey Eisner very, very well. So I'm going to talk a lot. So this is what I'm going to do to make sure that I stay on task. We're going to lead you through a remembrance and celebration of Chauncey and Ken, who both had ties to the Grange and Pondville, where we live. Quite often, Ashley and I wear our Pondville shirts. And Norma Shrewham, who was not able to join us today, but but is a member of Pomona and Norfolk Grange 135. Also lives in Pondville. She has lived in Pondville longer than we have. So this is how our presentation is going to proceed. I'm going to do a fun, no stress, who said this memorabilia in words, a little fun and funny activity. And then Ashley and I are going to provide a little music to just set the stage for Ken Coulter. We're going to set the stage of Pondville in the middle 1920s. Ken did not have his restaurant as early as that, but the restaurant era in Pondville started in the middle 20s. We're going to provide some nice pictures. I'm going to start by reading a very short excerpt from the book that I wrote about Pondville. I retired from teaching in 2005, so I had some time to do something different than first grade and teachers unions. Then we will spotlight Ken Coulter. I met Ken, I just adored him. First of all, he looked like my father. And he had that kind of corny sense of humor like my father did. I spent the whole time sort of laughing at his little quips. As he so deftly glued things and put things together, and his little comments were so much fun to listen to. I really enjoyed him so much. And then after that, of course, we're going to move our Grange spotlight to Chauncey Eisner, brother Chauncey Eisner, who devoted more than 70 years. Now, we're relatively new. We're not, the Whitneys have been members for less than 2 years. And when I joined, Grange Hall wasn't open yet, so this has been quite a lot for us to go through, to experience the reopening of Grange. Chauncey belonged to 4 Granges in 4 different towns, which I will talk about in a while. We have so many, and I have been thrilled to see you all walking around, visiting the displays. As a teacher, I think that the visual, all the kinesthetic senses, as we call them, the hearing, the looking, the picking up. We certainly did some tasting today. We had more food, although boy, a lot of it went. This is a well-fed crew. And I had next on my list to introduce our visitors, but they have been with us and have enjoyed the family format that we have here. And I'm so glad to see them sitting right in front of me. So, here we go with a walk into the past. Now, I promised you some questions. Who did this? He walked from Pondville to the Walpole Grange. He walked from Pondville to the movies in Foxborough. Who did that, Ron? Right! Where could one find these items? Baguette fougasse, which is French bread. Poulet frite. I'm not French, I'm really putting it on. Chicken and fries. Coq au vin, which I always thought sounded so wonderful. It's rooster. Boudin blanc, which is delicate flavored sausage. Mousse au chocolat, obviously chocolate mousse. Who knows where one might have gotten those? I know you all think the Grange dinner, no. That would have been at the Maison du Ballet, which is a restaurant that Ken Coulter bought, operated for 3 years in Pondville, for heaven's sake. And when I was researching for my book, Timmy Sharon said, you know, And I said, I had heard that, but I didn't believe it. I didn't think Pondville was that exclusive to have a French restaurant. Indeed, Ken bought, ran, participated in, and was a loved owner and sort of master of a jack of all trades. Who said this? And it would make me really choke up, which I do when I say this. Quote, "Even now, I can still see her walking down the staircase on our wedding day. I can still see how beautiful she is." Who said that? Chauncey. Back to Marjorie. What was Marjorie talking about? I was intrigued by his ability and creativeness. Johnny Forrester, I know you'll be all embarrassed that they were right down there. I am so glad to see you. Johnny Forrester is a fellow Pondvilleite who worked with me a lot on my book, and he's a dear friend, and thank you for coming. Here's the little excerpt from my book. When Timmy, who was actually Kathy, everybody called her Timmy, when her parents had sold the house on Devon Street and all the children were gone, the Sharons sold the house that was on Sharon's Ave to a Mr. Coulter. Timmy described him simply as Mr. Coulter, who opened a French restaurant for a brief time. Yes, I said French restaurant. It was called Dubarry's, and it had a 3 to 5 year business life. Kathy, who lived in this house when it was a residence, recalled having dinner once at the restaurant in her own house and sat in what was once the family room. So that's kind of a nuance to me, to be in a house that used to be the one you lived in, and then you're there having dinner. So, we're going to set, we're going to set the time for, we're going to start in the 1925s. Make sure I get this on one. The Shady Nook on Route 1A in Pondville. It is now the Horse and Carriage. So this is the restaurant that Ken opened up, and when I think of Ken Coulter, I think of food and flowers. I interviewed a man by the name of Louis Caterina, and he described Ken in this way: warm, genuine, unique, real, easygoing, good old guy, respected. So I have put together, again, to keep me on task and so that I can stick to the salient parts of Ken's life and how he got connected, which we know Georgia helped with that, with the Grange. Ken was born in 1928 and he grew up in South Walpole. Now, Norfolk students went through the elementary schools and then in high school went to Walpole. A woman by the name of Alice Callahan of Norfolk went to high school in Walpole, and that would be your mother, and met Ken. In 1945-ish, I'm just going to quickly refer to my note, Ken enlisted in the Army, and he left, and he was stationed in Virginia at Camp Lee in Virginia. He had already fallen in love with Alice Callahan, so in 1947, Ken and Alice were married. Now, Ken went to Korea shortly thereafter, and Alice remained obviously at home. In the mid-50s, Alice and Ken bought a house in, I think, Franklin first for a short while. And then shortly after, they bought a house connected to a few greenhouses in Foxborough. Now, Georgia has described the area near where Foxborough State Hospital was. I can't go that way. And for 2 years, they operated several greenhouses and ran a store called Kiersey Gardens. And I said, oh, any special reason why you called it Kiersey Gardens? And I talked to Alice for quite some time, probably 6 months ago. And she said, well, that was the name, and when we bought it, we decided it was best to keep it. So they did. And son, Glenn Coulter, was born. Now, as I say, flowers and food. The next part of Ken's life sees some changes. He and Alice did divorce, and Ken ended up, off he went to Europe in the 60s. He traveled all over Europe, fascinated with the elegant cuisine and the lovely. I have been to Italy 6 times, so I know that about every 4 feet is another restaurant. Ken was all over Europe, and he was fascinated to learn about the restaurant and cooking, and it was a passion of his. He met a person over there named Jules Van Kam from Belgium, Antwerp, who also was fascinated and very involved in the restaurant business, and had actually, the way it was described to me, cooked for royalty, which I think is amazing. I cook at 26 Valley Street, that's as good as it gets. So they spent several years working together around various parts of Europe and continued to live a very nice lifestyle, being cuisine experts and restaurateurs. Well, it became closer to the 70s, and some things had changed in Pondville in that commercial zoning had come in all around the Pondville area. And Ken started thinking, and from what I gather, Ken dared to take a chance and maybe something? Yes, there had been restaurants, but a French restaurant? So he and Jules showed up in Pondville, and in 1977, bought this private home from Charlie Sharon. And I said to Louis Caterina, well, what did they do? Did they turn it into a French-looking villa or something? And he said, no, they didn't do anything on the outside, but the inside. And Georgia, you went to this restaurant. I would give anything to find the sign that was in lights. Now, the name DuBarry, I said, why did they choose DuBarry? Well, everybody, this picture of Madame du Barry, she was the favorite mistress of King Louis XV, I must say. And for some reason, that was just a very interesting point, and they wanted a French cuisine, so it was named Maison du Barry. And Ken worked hard. You'd see him in his everyday work clothes, helping everybody do the little stuff, and then when the dining time came around, he was quite elegant and appropriately addressing everybody in that man. But then he could be washing dishes and stuff. He was very versatile and very easy to work with and very easy to work for. And a picture that I have here, a small one, but I have a bigger one. This is one of the busboy or waiters feeling very comfortable, having a little Christmas fun, in that he decided to put the lights all over himself. So Ken ran the restaurant for 3 years, and it wasn't a terribly long time. And I asked Louis, why was it just 3 years? And he said, well, it was a 24/7 routine. He said it really was rude to the visitor, to the everyday casual onlooker. It was lovely, it was elegant, the decor was appropriate, it was just a beautiful place to be. And Ken worked hard. Jules did too, but Ken had the burden on his shoulder. And after 3 years, he thought, I think I'll call it a day. And in about 1980, Ken moved to Orlando. I'm pretty sure it was Orlando in Florida. And he stayed, he got back into the flowers. In 2010, Ken's health began to fail. And I believe Glenn and Carolyn went to Florida and brought Dad home. And he lived at Hillcrest Village, is that the correct term? Okay. And that's when I had the distinct pleasure of meeting him. And I sat right in the front row, and I thought, this man is just wonderful. And as I say, he looks like my father, he sounds like my father, and he really kept me engaged. And then when I was at the senior center one day, Thelma Levinsky, who happens to be in this picture right in front of Ken, said, Ken's the one who's in your book and you didn't know who he was. I was just about on my knees and Ken was a little surprised, like, okay, you may rise. I said, you're in my book, I never thought I'd meet you, this is amazing. Yeah, just me, that's all, just me. So, we lost Ken in 2012, and I was so happy to have been able to meet him, to watch him, and Georgia found 2 silver flower balls, is what I call them, and you trusted them with me for a couple of months now, and so I have them on display this way. So, when Georgia asked me for for the Memorial Day celebration to remember the two men from Pondville who had ties to the Grange. Of course, Ken, and of course, Brother Chauncey Eisner. It's 1909, Chauncey was born. Now, the Eisen family originally, way back, and it was changed in the 1890s, Eisenhower. The Eisenhower family, and Ron, I know you're looking at me, and if I say anything wrong, it's okay. I've been over this a million times. Emigrated from Germany to Nova Scotia, and then your branch of the, and in the 1890s, Eisenhower was shortened to Eisenhower, changed to Eisenhower.
We were online a couple of years ago and we found the original ship's manifest.
Yes.
And the name Eisenhower was spelled Y-S-E-N-D-H-A-A.
Chauncey was living in Shirley, grew up in Shirley. His father worked on a farm for the Shakers. He was Chauncey's father I'm talking about. Chauncey's father was a teamster, meaning he drove a team of horses. And the Shakers were very happy to have a man around, and even kind of suggested that perhaps Chauncey's father sort of remain with them. And he said, I'm sure diplomatically, no, I don't think I choose that kind of life. I think I'd like to go on and have a family. And Ron says, thank goodness he did. Totally, I wouldn't be here. So, the Norfolk Historical Commission, to just interject this, because I have indicated here, I'm going to read this next. The Henry Kirk Pond House, 48 Everett Street. Account books owned by the Pond family and dated 1841 contain records of all the materials used in the construction of this house and dates pertaining to its construction. They also list business records for a boot shop. This fine example of the English cottage style of architecture is currently owned by Chauncey Eisner. When this was written, Chauncey was still living. Chauncey knew that his house was also considered Greek revival. He loved to say, my house is a form of Grecian architecture. Grecian architecture instead of Greek revival. And Betsey Pines said, oh, he was such an inspirational figure. He was a worker and a giver. Boy, did he love that house. And I know that for a fact. He grew up and went to parochial schools in Shirley. And eventually, when he was a teenager, his family moved to Leominster. And as I said, Chauncey had a 70-year plus affiliation with Grange's. In the late 1920s, Chauncey joined the Wachusett Grange in Leominster, correct, Ron?
Right. Oh, Wachusett of Leominster.
Wachusett of Leominster. Okay. Now, he grew up in Leominster after having moved away from Shirley. He obtained a scholarship from the Grange. I have just found this out recently. And he was accepted and went to Clark University, from which he graduated in 19 scholarship and graduated from Clark University
Right,
in 1971,
right,
correct?
right.
Your dad loved and spoke how many languages?
I don't really know. What he did was he majored in German.
He was good at language. He wanted to return to Germany and study further. I think he wanted to get his doctorate. But unfortunately, the Depression hit. And as Ron described it, and I just want to make sure I get my quotes correct, Ronnie said, Chauncey suffered through the Depression. He just was never able to find the real job that he wanted. And so that was a difficult twist and turn in the road. But knowing Chauncey as I do now, Chauncey kept on walking down that road and did very well. Now, in 1940, I want you to point to the picture, wait a minute, stay right there. Point to that. The pointer right on, yes. And that's Pondville Hospital. And in 1940, Chauncey was hired at Pondville Hospital. Obviously in Pondville, it's in walking distance from the house that we live in now. Well, he began visiting in the early 1940s. He began visiting the Walpole Grange. Now here comes the fun part. He went to the Walpole Grange, and of course Chauncey didn't drive because he had been born legally blind. But he didn't mind, boy did he walk. So he walked to the Norfolk, to the Walpole Grange, and what do you know, there was this lovely, tall, blonde young lady, and I'm sure Chauncey noticed her right away, but he was very polite, and I think it was probably a smile or a little wave, and he would walk back to Pondville to what they call the dorms. People who work there could live on campus. Well, need I ask if Chauncey went back the next time to the next meeting at the Walpole Grange? Oh yes, he did. Well, says Christine, hi, I remember you. Oh, what a coincidence, I guess, said Chauncey. Well, they kind of sit near each other, and however Chauncey put it, it was obvious that he had walked there and would love a ride home. So Christine said, oh, gee, I live in Pondville. I could just give you a lift home. Oh, great. Oh, what a fabulous idea. What a surprise. So Chauncey and Christine, off they went, and she drove him back to Pondville Hospital. And what do you think? The next month, Chauncey went to the Grange meeting, and it was getting to be kind of pro forma. Hi, sit next to each other. I'll give you a lift home. Great. I think Ronnie said that after that it was just automatic. I mean,
On the third time.
I was the third. He's the third. Oh. Well, she lived in the Carlson house, which of course is now called the Eisner House. This is a long time ago, way back, and this is now. So Christine and Chauncey began a lovely courtship, and Ronnie was fastidious in pointing out to me it was very correct and appropriate courtship, and they would begin going to movies together. And did Christine walk with him to Foxborough movies?
Sure.
She was pretty good about that.
Because at that point in time, there was what was called gas rationing.
Yeah.
So that meant that the only gas Nothing else rated the use of gas.
Well, in 1947, Chauncey and Christine married in the Carlson house. And Chauncey said, many years later, I close my eyes and I can see how beautiful, which I read in that quote. I can see her coming down those stairs. And after the house was being restored by Chris and Yvonne Moore, I was in it with the Historical Commission and I saw that staircase. And I was in a world of my own envisioning. And Betsey Pine, the head of the Historical Commission, said that quote to me then as well. And she said, what a wonderful thing to hear Chauncey say. I really think that's great. So, Mr. and Mrs. Chauncey Eisner moved into part of the Carlson house, made a little apartment, and in 1949, Ron Eisner was born. Right, Ron? Now, Chauncey ended up working in the hospital until 1973. And he raised two boys. Ron has a younger brother named David. And Christine worked in Boston at the John Hancock Building. Well, in the early 70s, now, as I said, Chauncey was born legally blind. In the early 70s, Chauncey became totally blind. In 1987, Christine, due to illness, had passed away. And that was a huge, obviously, huge change in Chauncey's life. But the Chauncey Eisner that I have grown to know said, all right, onward, I'm going to move in a direction. And he did. He began singing, is what he did. And one of his many talents, he had a wonderful voice. He began singing in churches, and especially he would sing the national anthem. As if that wasn't enough, Chauncey decided to travel. He went to Italy, Turkey, Greece, and Israel. That's right.
And he sang.
And
he sang on a boat cruise on the Sea of Galilee.
he would go with a group that was taking a group tour, and he knew the places that the group would be visiting. And he would learn songs that were appropriate, and he would sing. And especially, Ronnie told me at the garden, there was a particular garden in Israel that the group would visit, and Chauncey sang a beautiful song there. Well, I said to Ronnie, so your dad was blind at this point, and he was a widower. And so he started singing. I think that's a pretty positive step forward. And then the man is going off to Europe, and he's doing this singing with groups. I mean, my God, this guy is amazing. Well, when he came back and met up with, I think it's Gog Woodhams, another historian in Grantham. They began visiting schools, talking about, and I know from teaching in public school that there's Disability Awareness Month. And they would give presentations to the students about disability awareness. And of course, Ashley, I see you, and I totally forgot to give you your cue. So we were talking about that beautiful, tall, blonde who married Chauncey, when Chauncey, what, do it again. Once more, I wish that I had made my picture a little bit bigger, but that is Chauncey at the Federated Church reading a sermon in Braille. So Ron graduated, as I said, from Clark University in 1971. Immediately upon graduation, he was awarded, he got the offer from MIT to do a computer program, which I've heard, and I'm so embarrassed because I lose things that I've typed and say to the screen, come back, I can't do anything. Ronnie is unbelievable. So for a year, you took part in a computer training program in Boston at MIT. So you had to move there. But your dad, of course, wanted to stay in his own beautiful home with the gardens and more gardens and the flowers and the vegetables that are all captured in the pictures on the tables. Betty Cole sent those to me. I got them yesterday. And Ron, of course, wanted his father to stay for the rest of his life where he was happy. And I think that's real nice, Nate. So when you wheel me around, yes, I will. We'll take care of that. That's so much. So Ron took it upon himself, I want to keep Dad at home. But you had a dilemma. You had the job in Boston, and you really had to move. Now enter Leslie Bryant, George's son. And Ron and Leslie were very good friends. And Leslie knew that you were going to get home from Boston at least once or twice a week. And Leslie would go down to the train station in Norfolk and pick you up, Ron, and bring you to your dad's house. And of course, people, I think, would say to Chauncey, oh, you sure you can? And his attitude was, yeah, I can take care of myself. That your dad, because of your commitment to keeping him at home, and all that Leslie did to help you, Chauncey Eisner remained in the house on Everett Street until he passed away in 2004. And he is interred at the Pondville Cemetery, which is a chapter in my book, and I spent a lot of time at the Pondville Cemetery. And whenever I go by Chauncey Eisner's stone, and Ron, I think Georgia took that picture of you in the middle of April. So, Chauncey is very much in Pondville forever. And I'm going to, because I'm looking at the clock and I know that we have a Corona meeting and then we can visit after. In 2006, conservation, preservation, restriction, which is something Chauncey had always wanted, was bestowed upon the house, and it's a definite legal process to go through. In 2008, the house was sold to Yvonne and Chris Moore, people who love and adore that house, not quite as much as Ron, but they're right up there. And they're in the process of restoring it as I speak. People remember Chauncey to this day sitting outside, enjoying his world, which is 48 Everett Street, and Chauncey is very much with us. And even though I never met him,